to talk really about two things fairly quickly. One of them is about the NEP, so National Energy Performance Strategy, that was released a little while ago, that I know a number of people were disappointed about because it didn't include lots of new money for lots of big things. But it does set us up with a really useful framework and a really strong opportunity to get the demand side conversation in the middle of important policy making in Canberra, including, I think, critically, the energy and electricity sector plan, which is being led by our minister. We're kicking off next week our new Energy Performance Advisory Group, which I can't say who's on it yet because it's not all completely resolved, but a lot of the people in this room are on it, and will be giving us direct and ongoing advice without having to write submissions to government inquiries, which I hope they will be pleased about, on a whole range of questions, including the ones that are the subject of this symposium today. We're very conscious that there is a really significant gap below safeguard, and that industrial decarbonisation, and particularly industrial energy efficiency, are underdone, and we need to do more. We need to find ways to do a lot more. The other thing I just wanted to spend a second on is the sector plans. Conscious that my colleagues from the Department of Industry, Science and Resources are here, which is fantastic to see. We're working really hard from my division with colleagues in DISA on particularly the industrial net zero plan, but also built environment and resources, and collaborating with colleagues in other departments on the agriculture and land plan and the transport plan. When they were all set out as a way to cover the whole economy, it was made clear that energy efficiency was a cross-cutting enabler that needed to be a feature of all of those plans. And so I guess that from my point of view, from the energy performance perspective, that's what we're trying to drive, and they're the conversations that we're currently trying to have across the Commonwealth and with state and territory colleagues. So they're our main points of focus right now.
I was actually struck in Tennant's excellent digest that there's a missing column of activities which might be called barrier busting. There's actually another one called design, which I'll talk about later. But there are 60 or 80 well-known market failures that practitioners in this room butt up against every day in trying to use energy in a way that saves money. And policymakers around the world tend to focus on getting the price right rather than enabling people to respond to price, which is even more important. And there are some rather obvious examples. Why, for example, do we pay our architects and engineers for what they spend, not what they save? And the public sector or the private sector could perfectly well lead in performance-based design fees, which we've tried, and they have a very salutary effect on design. There are rather simple things that, for example, a local authority could do, like if someone comes for approvals to build something, put them to the head of the queue if it's, say, a net zero or net positive building. That costs government nothing but time and money to a developer. There are each of the 60 or 80 market failures or obstacles can be turned into a business opportunity, but this takes a particular kind of policy focus that's rather rare. And I'm sure you've got the talent to do it, but it might not have occurred to people that barrier busting is so important. And I think at all levels of government, this would be a very good thing to focus on. And perhaps it's already going on, and I'll learn more in Canberra on Monday about that. We'll see.
Can I just call out what I assume is a career highlight by giving notes on one of your charts from Amory Lovin's Tennant?
I'll never wash that chart again.
Amory, the other thing that came up in our conversation last night was the danger of focusing on incremental gains versus transformative change, and that by focusing on the little things that we can do to pick up small savings. Sometimes that can distract us from really big change that can be made if we think at that systems level. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, well, incremental change is important, but often subject to diminishing returns. The more you save, the dearer it gets. However, if you have a much higher ambition, you often find that the cost curve comes down again to less even than you started with. And I'll give some examples of this in my remarks later. But, why get there the long way around when you can tunnel through the cost barrier? So in buildings, for example, you could ask, is there a reasonable way to design this building so it doesn't need mechanical equipment? And often there is, in fact, practically always there is. And then it's cheaper because you save more money getting rid of the HVAC than you pay extra for the efficiency that gets rid of it. And it's analogous in transport and in industry very often. A lot of people don't realize that the same sort of no extra cost net zero buildings approach applies perfectly well in the other sectors. And that's the big frontier. I think that Anna correctly pointed us towards, and it comes from design, not so much from technology. We've got the technology already, although it'll keep getting better.
What Amory is describing that can be achieved by design is empowered when we embed our desired net zero goal at the heart of whichever of the policies on the list, in Tennant's list and in the list that we'll discuss now. And the precinct approach that I described is a way to align multiple layers of government and multiple sectors around a common goal. And the companies themselves said, impose the goal on the place, please. And the power of that is so that it drives the demand, the design of everything, the design of the infrastructure, the design of the economic incentives, including, for example, the length of offtake contracts, because you're solving for a 30-year economic revitalisation in many of these industrial regions, not a 5-year period, which is often a government policy timeframe, understandably. We do have some significant policy tools that now enable this or almost do. And so 3 that aren't on your list, but I mentioned one of them, AEMO, our Australian Energy Market Operator, produces the ISP, the Integrated System Plan. It is currently operating on what's called the step change scenario, selected largely by a process of replicating what the market determines is most likely. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a likelihood assessment. But the green exports scenario, which AEMO has also mapped, is in fact the one that matches the Paris Agreement and the renewable energy superpower, which will be the theme of the Treasurer's speech tonight and has been accepted as a core goal of not just the federal government, but all the state governments. So we can flick the switch in AEMO's planning. There is a detailed infrastructure plan already written for the energy system to be of the scale that's needed to manage all the demand that you were referring to. And I absolutely agree that that's demand minus the efficiency dividend, which is design plus improvements. So we've suggested that if it's too big a leap to do that for the whole economy, because there are still some commitments in place for the next 5 years, flick it in the industrial zones where there are multi-decade infrastructure decisions that need to be made. And those plans have been written broadly, and you would want to downscale it at the precinct scale and do a regional ISP on the green export scenario for all of our heavy industrial zones. We could do that. We can commence that immediately. I mentioned, I can't say enough how important the sector plans are, so I won't repeat what I said earlier, but just such a big moment and really fantastic that this year we have this opportunity. Government's using the word sector plan. Companies use the word transition plan. And Luke, as you all know, your colleagues and mine are working together with another program which comes from the Treasury portfolio and this is the Credible Transition Plans program. That language is basically a sector plan for a company, but a company touches many sectors. At the heart of it all, it's a long-term net zero plan. Whatever language you use, that's what's needed. That's how we get the design thinking into it. That's what we're here to solve for. And it's how you bust through the barriers of 3-year corporate plans or 5-year policy periods, etc. Or in our natural monopoly infrastructure, regulatory reset periods, regulators are often constrained by the window that they're given. The sector plan and the transition plan can sit over that and provide the guidance that allows you to bust through those barriers. And fortunately, Treasury is about to mandate disclosure at the company level of forward emissions targets, not just what's old language, scope 1 and 2, but scope 3, which is the emissions of your suppliers and your customers. Once you do that, you need a full sector plan if you're a company. You need to know how your customers and your suppliers will change their emissions, because you will be disclosing your estimates of theirs and your future targets to achieve net zero. That's coming in Treasury legislation. So the companies are saying, we want to know what the sector plan is because we want to know how our customers and suppliers are going to change. So we've got this moment now where we can say, actually, we have mapped what should guide the design. Then we're just in the game, as you've highlighted, how does policy move from low ambition to high ambition? It'll be a few steps forward and a few steps back. And these opportunities, for example, to do front of the queue type incentives before you end up doing everyone in the queue mandatory approaches.
There is a gargantuan gap between the domestically oriented energy transition that the central scenario of the integrated system plan represents and various flavours of energy superpower. There's a real challenge, or several of them though, in bridging the gap between those things, because which exports? I mean, some of the highly energy intensive activities, industrial activities that transition largely meet domestic demand, and Australian policy has an influence on that, maybe a big influence with very ambitious policy. But a lot of it is export oriented. And AEMO, bless their cotton socks, don't know much about those markets. And Australia has very little influence on those markets. So the demand for specifically clean products is an incredibly important thing to grow. Anybody who knows me knows I have an answer to how you grow that demand, which is carbon border adjustment mechanisms in major markets. We are seeing some of that, and ideas for comparable mechanisms take shape. But if you don't know, how fast is there going to be demand for green steel in like really large quantities, you're really taking a flyer if you invest in the infrastructure and in the production capacity to meet that. And so I think we are going to have to take some flyers, but it's a very tricky process.